Hello friends, this is Jim das Selvas, to start a new series called What If, in which we will test different strategies for a given scenario. To start this series, we will use some scenario from the Pacific Theater of Operations from Starter Kit 4. The Starter Kit is made up of a collection of modules that cover the Advanced Squad Leader System games in a simplified way, which makes learning the extremely complex rules much easier. Starter Kit 1 addresses issues relating to infantry mechanisms. Starter Kit 2 addresses issues relating to artillery. Starter Kit 3 revolves around the use of armored combat vehicles. Starter Kit 4, which is the module we will use in the next episodes, deals with the Pacific Theater of Operations. And finally, Decision at Elst, which covers campaign games. In the next episodes, we will create a new playlist, in which Jim will approach the same scenario using different tactical approaches to see how the decisions may influence the result of the match. The current scenario is a scenario from the Starter Kit 4 module, No Japanese Whitin, 100 miles, ASL Scenario S78, designed by Brian Youse. The action takes place in Java in 1942, in which the Japanese invasion had already been taking place for a few days. Despite this, Dutch intelligence reported that there had been no landings on the island. Australian forces formed defensive positions along the Tjiantem River and, contrary to intelligence, 5 Japanese tanks suddenly appeared to attempt to seize a bridge over the river. Australian forces destroyed 2 of the tanks with anti-tank rifles. This fact led to the withdrawal of the remaining tanks, while the Japanese infantry looked for other positions to cross the river. The commander of the Australian forces on the island of Java, Blackforce, Temporary Brigadier Arthur Blackburn, sends a reinforced company from his former battalion towards the highway that crosses the island in a north-south direction to defend the perimeter, and this is the general situation. The map. The map used is the M map, with Australian troops positioning themselves towards the east behind the N column. An advanced position of scouts, consisting of 2 first-class half squads together with a 7-0 leader, must be positioned within 2 hexes of the J7 hex. Japanese units will enter the scene in 2 waves, the first from positions west of column G, and the second wave at the beginning of the second round. This map has some interesting features. In the central portion to the east, where Australian units will likely deploy, there is a high position, level 1, that dominates much of the southern scenery that extends to at least column H. In this southwest sector there are some buildings that are considered as huts in this scenario. The huts, unlike the wooden buildings of regular ASL, are not an obstacle to the line of sight, and only constitute hindrance, +1 when this line crosses the figure of the building. The dice roll modifier, resulting from the protection provided by these huts, is +1. To the north, there are several hexes, made up of palm groves, which would be the equivalent of orchards in the European theater of operations. Palm groves cause 1 movement factor for infantry to enter the hex, and unlike orchards they are always in season, which creates an obstacle in the line of sight between units at different elevations. For units on the same terrain level, the palm grove provides no protection, only +1 hindrance for each hex between the line of sight of the firing unit and its target. A peculiarity of the starter kit is that obstacles impede line of sight for all hexes through which this line of sight continues. For example, a unit over elevation, level 1, in hex Q6, will have its line of sight completely obscured by the palm grove in M8, for hexes M8, L8, K9, J9, I10 and H10. This would not happen in normal ASL modules, in which the blind spot for the unit in Q6 would be the M8 and L8 hexes. Like orchards, palm groves are considered inherent, Rule 3.2.1. This implies the loss of the line of sight that extends to the boundary line of the hexes occupied by palm groves. The forests in this scenario are considered dense forests, requiring the expenditure of 2 movement factors to enter these hexes, which provide a modifier to the dice result of +2. Forests are considered inherent terrain and are an obstacle to line of sight. The Japanese will be the attackers and their victory condition will be the absence of Australian units, in good order, without broken morale, in the level 1 elevation hexes. Special Scenario Rules. There is a +1 hindrance added to any shot at distances greater than or equal to 1 hex, which does not affect the modifiers for shots, units, in open terrain, residual fire, routing, interdiction or gain and loss of concealment. All buildings at level 0 are huts and all buildings at level 1 are palm groves. At the start of 3 phases of Japanese prep fire, the Japanese are entitled to an attack of 12 firepower without modifiers on a hex of their choice. If this hex is at 0 elevation level, a result of 1 will be required when rolling a die. If the hex is at elevation level 1, a result of 1 or 2 will be required when rolling the die. The cost in movement factors will be 1.5 for hexes in open terrain. Australian elite and first-class squads do not suffer cowering, and units in good order and not green receive a bonus of -1 when rolling the die to check the possibility of an ambush. The Australian medium machine guns, manned by the 228 teams, will have a fire rate of 3. Units. Australians. 5 first-line squads, 457. For machine gun teams 228. 2 half squad 247. 270 leaders, an 80 leader and a 9-1 leader. For medium machine guns. The Japanese, in the first wave will have 8 squads 447. 1 team 228. A leader 10-1, a leader 80. A medium machine gun. 2 light machine guns. A 50mm mortar. The second wave, which will enter the scene from the west, will feature 4 squads 447. A 90 leader and an 80 leader. 2 light machine guns. The Japanese will have 7 turns to complete the scenario's victory conditions. First, the Australians will be deployed in predetermined areas, arrayed across the entire length of the front, in protected positions, under the concealment marker. The Australians' first line of defence, consisting of 2 half squads and a leader 70 will be deployed in the huts of hexes ML7 and K9. To finalize the disposition of Australian troops, concealment markers will be overlaid over Australian units in hexagons with concealment terrain, huts, jungle, kunai, and bamboo. The Japanese will concentrate their forces in the southern portion of the map, seeking to set up a fire base under the shelter of the huts, to try to suppress the Australian units in this sector, engaging and destroying them and, from there, begin the attack on the Australian positions in the hills. At this point, Jim misreads the rules and prematurely makes his first mistake and removes the concealment markers from Australian units that are under line of sight of Japanese units, which should not be done, as these units are in hexes with ground of concealment. Having established the parameters of this battle, we will prepare for the first fight of this new playlist, What If, where alternative strategies will be implemented and tested to analyze how this may affect the result of the matches. We'll see you soon. In preparing this video, after a more detailed reading of the Starter Kit 4 rulebook, the concealment markers are once again placed over the Australian units. This marker reduces the firepower of enemy units by half, constituting a great advantage for the defenders. Rally Face Japanese, Turn 1. To start this battle, the Japanese will launch an attack with 12 firepower, without modifiers, to which the Brazilian forces are entitled at the beginning of their turn, as determined by the special rules of the scenario. The chosen hex is MQ6 on the hill, and the result of rolling one die of 1 or 2 will be necessary for this attack to take effect. The Japanese have no effect, and we proceed to the prep fire phase, since there are no actions in the rally phase. Prep fire phase. The Japanese will begin this phase with the use of mortars to try to throw a smoke screen over the enemy's positions to protect the advance of their units. The mortar can release smoke with a depletion number of 7, that is, if the roll of the dice results in a number greater than 7, the ammunition for this type of fire does not exist for the rest of the scenario. At 6 hexes away, the basic number to reach hex MM9 will be 7, plus 2 for the smoke release, with the final number of 9, which will be reduced again to 7 by the presence of hindrance caused by the huts in MH6 and I7, raised to 8 due to the presence of the Japanese leader. Nine and firing does not occur, and this mortar is marked as not having smoke ammunition. Now the mortar will make an attack on the Australian position in MQ6. At 10 hexes away, the base number to hit the target will be 7, plus 1 for the hut image obscuration in MK6, plus 2 for the Australian unit's concealment marker, minus 1 for the Japanese leader, with a final number for reach the target of 5. The target is not hit and ends its participation in this phase, and a -1 acquisition counter is placed in the occupied hex. The Japanese fire base in MG7, with the light and medium machine guns, will fire on the ML7 hex, with 8 firepower, reduced to 4 by the enemy unit's concealment marker, plus 4 by the hindrances of the palm grove in MH7, from the hut in ML7, for the hindrance determined by the special rules of the scenario, and another one for the protection of the hut. (10 plus 4 14), it's a miss, and the machine guns don't maintain the rate of fire. Movement phase. Japanese units will advance launching a bonsai charge on the Australians in ML7. To carry out a bonsai charge, it is necessary to have at least one leader present, in this case leader AT, in MG9, who will be accompanied by squads, in hexes in 8, G9 and G10. The first impulse, in which two movement factors were used due to one of the Japanese units having entered the hut in MH9. In this first impulse, the Australians chose not to fire any shots and preserved the concealment marker. Second impulse, with a total of 4 movement factors, and again, the Australians refrained from firing. Third boost, with a total expenditure of 5.5 movement factors. The cost of moving in open terrain is 1.5 movement factors, as determined by the special rules of the scenario. Japanese units are in hexes adjacent to the Australian position in MK9. At this point, the Australians in MN9 renounce the concealment marker and will carry out an attack on the Japanese in MJ9, which is illegal, as the presence of the jungle representation in MM10, which is inherent terrain, impedes MN9's line of sight about MJ9. In any case, the shot will occur with 8 firepower, plus 1 hindrance, as determined by the special rules of the scenario. Seven plus 1 equal 8. Normal morale check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. Nine, and the Japanese unit suffers a reduction in personnel, becoming a squad 347. New firing of 6 firepower from the machine gun and half of the firepower from squad 457, subsequent first fire, plus 1 for the hindrance of the scenario. 3 plus 1 is 4, which would be 2 morale check, which Jim considers as K/2, casualty reduction, followed by 2 morale check, and the machine gun remains at the rate of fire. Seven plus 2 equals 8, which is the equivalent of the Japanese unit's morale. Remember that Japanese units participating in a bonsai charge have their morale raised by 1 point. Firing with the machine gun's rate of fire on the Japanese in MJ8. For firepower, plus 1 for the scene hindrance, plus 1 for the hut hindrance in MK9. Jim places a 2 residual fire in the attack hex, which should be reduced to 1 by the hut's hindrance. The hindrance determined by the scenario's special rules does not influence the residual fire. 6 plus 2 is 8, which is a miss, and the machine gun loses its rate of fire. The Australian squad in MN8 fires a 4 firepower shot at the Japanese in MJ8 with plus 2 hindrance, special rule, and the palm grove in MM8. Seven plus 1 is 8, which is a miss. This second impulse ends with another Japanese squad suffering a casualty reduction. Third impulse, and the half squad in MJ9 and the squad that suffered the casualty reduction in MJ8 penetrate the hut with the Australians in MK9, while other units move to the MK8 and K7 hexes. The total spent on movement factors so far is 7.5 movement factors, which Jim, despite using the data to mark the movements used, considers as 6. With the penetration of the Japanese in MJ8, it is mandatory for Australian units to fire in this hex, which will lose the concealment marker. The shot will be with 2 firepower, tripled to 6, as it is a shot on the same hex, +1 for the hut, -1 for the non-assault movement. Seven normal morale check. Japanese units pass. Subsequent first fire with 2 firepower without modifiers. Nine, which is a miss. Finishing the bonsai charge. The rest of the Japanese units penetrate hex ML7, where they will suffer a 6 firepower attack without modifiers. Seven normal morale check. 9, and the Japanese leader passes, as his morale is raised to 9 due to being a participant in the bonsai charge, and Japanese leaders are immune to the pin immobilization. Subsequent first fire with 2 firepower without modifiers. 5 normal morale check. And the Japanese units pass unharmed. At this moment, the Australians in MQ5 and Q6 will fire with 16 firepower on the Japanese units that penetrated ML7. This shot will not affect Australian units in this hex, as these units are not yet in close combat. The modifiers will be +1 for the hindrance determined by the scenario rule, +1 for the hut, -1 for the non-assault movement. Double 2 + 1 is 5, which in the column of 16 firepower is, and the machine guns maintain the rate of fire. Australian units do not suffer from cowering due to special scenario rules. We have a 3 morale check. The Japanese leader does not pass and has his quality reduced to 8 + 1. With double 6, the first Japanese squad breaks above the ALR, and suffers 2 casualty reduction and then quality reduction, which Jim does not perform. The second squad suffers a casualty reduction and should have also suffered a quality reduction for having broken above the ALR. Machine guns take advantage of maintaining the rate of fire and fire 12 firepower +1 on the same hex. Nine + 1 is 10, which is a ping test check that the leader is immune to, but the Japanese units that just ended the bonsai charge are susceptible, but Jim ignores the fact. Machine guns lose their firing rate. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. The Japanese units that entered the Australian hexes in the bonsai charge can fire. The shot will be reduced by half due to the advancing fire phase, tripled due to the fact that the shot is at close range in the same hex, with the modifier equals 1 for the hut. MK9, 6 firepower +1. double tree that causes the cowering of Japanese units, that will have the analysis, in column 4, in the infantry fire table. 6 plus 1 is 7, which is pin test check in the 4 firepower column, and Jim considers the Australian unit as immobilized. ML7, with 6 firepower, plus 1. Eight plus 1 is 9, which is a miss. Rout phase. No actions. Advance phase. Japanese units that can advance 1 hex, while bonsai charge units enter close combat. Close combat. There is no possibility of an ambush, as the units in close combat come from a bonsai charge. Starting with the Mk9 hex, in which the Japanese will attack with 5 firepower against the Australians, 2 firepower, with a ratio of 2 to 1 requiring at least 7 to affect the Australians. These, in turn, will make an attack with half their firepower, 1 firepower, since they are pinned, with a ratio of 1 to 4 requiring at least 3 to affect the Japanese. The correct thing would be to start this close combat with the Japanese, who are the attackers, but Jim breaks protocol and starts with the Australians, who with a result of 8 do not affect the Japanese, who with a result of 5 eliminate the Australian half squad. Hex ML7, where the Japanese will attack with 6 firepower against the Australians' defense of 3, with a ratio of 2 to 1, with the +1 modifier for the Japanese leader, needing 6 or less to hit the Australians. The Australians will only attack the Japanese half squad with 3 firepower against 2, a ratio of 3 to 2, needing at least 6 to affect the Japanese half squad. With the roll of the dice, none of the factions are affected, ending the close combat, with these units being blocked in hand-to-hand combat. With this we finish the first Japanese turn, and we will move on to the rally phase of the first Australian round. Rally phase. No actions. Prep fire phase. The units in MN8 and N9 form a fire group and fire 12 firepower at the Japanese in Mk9 with modifiers, +1 for the hut, +1 per scenario rules. Six plus 2 is 8, 1 morale check, and the machine gun loses its firing rate. Squad 347 is reduced to half squad. The half squad has its morale broken and is under the DM marker with good Australian fire. The machine guns in MQ6 fire with 8 firepower on the stack in MH6. The modifiers will be +1 according to the scenario rules, +1 for the protection of the hut. Five plus 2 is 7, 1 morale check, and the machine guns maintain their rate of fire. The Japanese leader passes and will help the squads and crew in this morale test. The morale of Japanese units, alongside the leader, is increased by 1 point. The squad suffers a casualty reduction. New firing with the firing rate of machine guns, with 8 firepower, plus 2. 8 plus 2 is 10, which is a miss, and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. MQ5 versus MH6, with 4 firepower, plus 1 for the scenario rule, plus 1 for the HUD in MK6, plus 1 for the HUD protection in MH6, minus 1 for the Australian leader modifier. Eight plus 2 is 9, a miss. New fire with machine gun fire rate, with the same modifiers. 4 plus 2 is 6, normal morale check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The leader and the Japanese crew pass, and the squad becomes half squad. Seven plus 2 equals 9, is a miss with persistence of the firing rate. 5 plus 2 is 7, pin test, check. Which Jim forgets about the rule, in which Japanese leaders are not pinned. The half squad should be pinned, but Jim makes a mistake and puts it under the DM marker, and the machine gun maintains its rate of fire. Finally, this machine gun loses its firing rate and ends its participation in this phase. Movement phase. Mr. 2 to MS3, where he suffers a shot from the Japanese medium machine gun with 4 firepower. There will be many modifiers. Plus 1 for the scenario rule, plus 1 for the HUD in MK6, plus 3 for the palm groves in MM5, and 404, minus 1 for the non-assault movement. 9 and it is a miss, and the machine gun loses its rate of fire, and the Australians can continue on their way to MV4. Defensive fire phase. Mortar in MG6 fires at MQ6 from 10 hexes away, with a base number of 7 to hit, with an additional 1 for the hindrance of the HUD in MK6, plus 1 for the hindrance of the scenario rule, requiring a result of 5 or less to hit the target. Three plus 2 is 5 and the target is hit and the mortar maintains its firing rate. 5, which will be evaluated in the 2 firepower column, as it is an area target type shot. Normal morale check and a -1 acquisition marker is placed on the attack hex. The first crew gets pinned. The second crew passes and the squad's morale is broken. New shot requiring 7 or less to hit the target. 8. The target is not hit. The acquisition marker is changed to -2 and the mortar loses its firing rate and ends its participation in this phase. MK9 fires 2 firepower on Australian units in the hex with bamboo, with modifiers, +1 for bamboo, +1 according to the scenario rule. 11 and it's a miss. Advancing fire phase. No actions. Route phase. MK9 to MJ9 in low crawl. MH6 for the jungle at MH10. MQ6 for the hex with jungle in MT10. Advance phase. MV4 to MV5. MQ6 to Mr. 5. MQ5 to Mr. 4. The leader in MN9 for O10. Close combat phase. The units in combat in Hex ML7 will carry out the clash. The Australians have a 7-0 leader and a 2-3-7 half squad, with a total of 3 firepower, who will attack the Japanese half squad, with a ratio of 3-2, needing at least 6 to affect the enemy. The Japanese will attack the Australian units, with 6 firepower, with a ratio of 2-1, requiring at least 7 to affect the Australians. The Australians begin this fight and with 6 eliminate the Japanese half squad. The Japanese, with an excellent 5, eliminate the Australian units in this hex, and this concludes this Australian phase of the first turn. And we move on to Rally phase Japanese, turn 2. In this phase we will position the Japanese reinforcement that will enter the scenario in the next movement phase, with 1 leader and 2 squads going north, and the other leader and 2 squads carrying 2 light machine guns along the southern edge of the map. The Japanese in Hex MH10 will try to auto-rally with the modifiers, +1 for the auto-rally, -1 for the jungle, +4 for the DM marker. 8. And the Japanese do not recover morale and the DM marker is removed from the unit. Whoops. Jim forgot to reset the concealment markers on units that are in concealment terrain outside the line of sight of enemy units. Australians in MO10 and Hex MR5 qualify to receive the concealment token. The Japanese use the second attack with 12 firepower on Hex MR4, requiring a result of 1 or 2 when rolling a die. 6 and once again the attack is wasted. Prep fire phase. Mortar in MG6 on the MQ6 hex, with the base number to reach the hex of 7 and the modifiers, +1 for the conditions determined by the scenario rule, +1 for the huts in MK6, -2 for the acquisition marker, -2 in the MQ6 hex. 10 and it's a miss, and the mortar doesn't maintain the rate of fire. Movement phase. MH4 to MJ5. Squad with the MH6 light machine gun in assault movement to Me7 where it received an attack from the MQ6 medium machine gun with 4 firepower, +1 depending on the scenario, +1 for the hut. 10. It is a miss. The medium machine gun loses the rate of fire and one residual fire is placed on the attack hex. At this point, the Australians could attempt a subsequent first fire using the machine gun's sustained fire. However, this implies reducing the number of machine gun breaks on 10 and elimination, with a result of 12 on the dice. Squad with the medium machine gun from MH6 to Me8. MH6 leader, alongside the Japanese squad in MH10. It's time for the Japanese reinforcements, who will become exhausted. CX, now having 8 movement factors. Remember that due to the scenario, transit over open terrain costs 1.5 movement factors per hex. These units advance up to Me10. The northern stack also becomes exhausted, CX, and advances to Me1. The Australian units in MN9 launch an attack on the stack in ML7 with 8 firepower, +1 for the special rule, +1 for the palm grove, +1 for the hut. Five plus 3 is 8, normal morale check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The Japanese leader does not pass the test, and they have reduced their quality to 7+2. The Japanese squad is reduced to half squad. New shot, now with 6 firepower, +2 on the Mk9 hex. 6 plus 2 is 8, Australian units do not suffer cowering due to the scenario special rules, pin test check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The Japanese pass by. New fire, with the machine gun's rate of fire, with 4 firepower, +2. 2 plus 2 is 4, 1 morale check, and the machine gun again maintains the rate of fire. The Japanese pass by. New shot, same parameters. 10 and it's a miss with the machine gun losing rate of fire. Shooting from MN8 over ML7 with 4 firepower, +1, scenario rule, +1 for the palm grove, +1 for the hut. 9 and it's a miss. Advancing fire phase. Mk9 over MN9 with 1 firepower, +3. Eight and it's a new miss. ML7 over MN8 with 1 firepower, +3. New miss. Route phase. MJ9 to MJ10. Mr. 8 to MT10. Advance phase. Me1 over MF1. Me10 to MF9. MJ5 to MK6. Close combat. No actions. Rally phase of the Australian stage of the second turn. Australian unit auto-rally attempt in MT10. Modifiers, +1 for auto-rally, -1 for jungle, +4 for the DM marker. 3 plus 4 is 7 and the Australians begin this phase with an excellent recovery of morale. The Japanese in MH10 will try to recover their morale with the help of the leader, with modifiers of -1 for the jungle, -1 for the leader. The half squad regains morale. Prep fire phase. MN9 shoots over me 8, with 8 firepower, +1 by the scenario rule, +1 by the hut. Five plus 2 is 7, which is 1 morale check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. Nine plus 1 is 10, and the Japanese team's morale is broken and suffers a casualty reduction. Machine gun fire on the Hex Mk9 with 4 firepower, +2. 5 plus 2 is 7, ping test check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. 6 and the Japanese pass. New shot, same parameters. 4 plus 2 equals 6, which is a normal morale check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The Japanese half squad has its morale broken and falls under the DM marker. Machine gun in MQ6 over ML7 with 4 firepower, +2. It's a miss, and the machine gun loses its rate of fire. Machine gun firing in MN9, using the rate of fire about ML7 with 4 firepower, +3. 7 plus 3 is 10, new miss, maintenance of rate of fire. New shot, same parameters. 7 plus 3 is 10, miss and maintenance of rate of fire. New shot. 3 plus 3 is 6, normal morale check, rate of fire maintenance. The Japanese leader does not pass, and as his morale cannot be reduced, he is eliminated from the scene. The half squad does not pass the test and is placed under the DM marker, with excellent machine gun performance, which maintains the rate of fire. Movement phase. The squad at MT10 becomes exhausted, CX, and moves to MP10. Stacking in MR4 to MQ5 in assault movement. In this movement, it suffers an attack from MJ8 with the medium machine gun with 4 firepower, +1 according to the scenario rule, +1 due to the advantage of the crest. Seven plus 2 is 9, miss, and the machine gun loses its rate of fire. Shooting from MK6 with 4 firepower over MQ5 with modifiers of +1 according to the scenario rule, +1 for the crest advantage. (11) It is a miss, and the machine gun should become non-functional. As the Australian units use 2 movement factors to enter MQ5, the Japanese in MK6 will fire again with 1 firepower, +2. 2 plus 2 equals 4, normal morale check. The Australian leader becomes pinged. The machine gun team has its morale broken. The stack under the concealment marker at MB5 becomes exhausted and moves to MR4, losing the concealment marker with this move. Mr. 5 to MQ5 in assault movement, keeping the concealment marker. Defensive fire phase. Mortar in MG6 over the Australians in MQ6, base number, to achieve, +1 per scenario rule, +1 for the hut in MK6, -2 for the acquisition marker, -2. 9. It is a miss, and the mortar loses the rate of fire. Advancing fire phase. Shooting MN8 over ML7 with 2 firepower, +3. It's a miss. Rout phase. The machine gun team with broken morale, at MQ5, should move to the nearest protective hex, which in this case, is hex MR2. The half squad in MK9, in low crawl, for MJ9. The unit's DM marker, is removed in MJ10, as it should already be eliminated, in the rally phase of this turn. The Japanese, in ML7 move, towards hex MJ10, in low crawl, entering MK8. Advance phase. The stack at MR5 splits, and the machine gun team moves to MQ5, maintaining the concealment marker. MR4 to MQ5. The leader at MR5 moves to MR4. The squad under the CX marker in MO10 to MN10. The leader under the concealment marker from MO10 to MP9. The machine gun team in MQ6 retreats from this hex to get away from the Japanese mortar takeover marker. MN9 to M10 ending the advance phase. Close combat phase. No actions and we immediately move to the rally phase of the Japanese phase of the third turn. Alright, with this second turn over, let's wrap up this episode. Of note was the impressive maintenance of the rate of fire of the Australian machine guns, which contributed greatly to practically eliminating the enemy units that launched a bonsai charge in the southern portion of the scenario. The Japanese, in turn, eliminated the most advanced group of the Australians, consisting of 2 half squad and a 7-0 leader, losing in the process a good part of their force, with the elimination of an 8-0 leader, a complete squadron, and the reduction of at least 4 squads to half squads, which is not good at all. Japanese reinforcements are advancing and are expected to reach the front line in the third turn, where they will attempt to displace the Australians from their strong defensive positions. See you soon. Namaste. So far, at the beginning of this third round, the Japanese are accumulating misses among their units, including an 8-0 leader and a squad, in addition to at least 3 squads suffering reductions in their strength, becoming half squads. The Australians also suffered misses, losing a 7-0 leader and 2 half squads. Having a squad with broken morale that will try to recover its morale in the next round, it is isolated without the presence of a leader to help recover its morale, and, as it is a Japanese phase, they do not get the benefit of the auto rally. Let's move on to the Japanese third round. Rally phase Japanese, turn 3. We start this phase with the last shot allowed for the Japanese, according to the special rules of the scenario, on any hex of their own choice. This shot will have 12 firepower, without modifiers, requiring 1 or 2 when rolling a die. The Japanese are unlucky and can't make this shot, and let's move on to the rally phase. Attempt to auto-rally in half squad on MJ10, requiring 3 or less to recover morale. There is no recovery of morale. Prep fire phase. Fire group in Me8 and I9, with 8 firepower, plus 1 per scenario rule, plus 3 per jungle hex. 9 plus 3 is 12, it's a miss, and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. Squad fire with MK6 machine gun on Australian units in MQ5 with 4 firepower, plus 1 according to the scenario rule, plus 1 due to the advantage of the crest, height advantage. In this attack, there are Australian units under the concealment marker, and in this case, the attack will be evaluated in the 2 firepower column. For plus 2 is 6, which will be normal morale check on Australian units, without concealment, and pin test check on the unit under the concealment marker, which will lose this marker. Let's start with pin test check. The Australian team passes. Normal morale check. The Australian leader is pinned. The squad is also pinned. Movement phase. The CX markers are removed. MF1 to MJ3. Half squad at MH10 to MJ10. And receiving, in this position, a shot of 4 firepower from MN8, with modifiers of plus 1 according to the scenario rule, plus 2 for the jungle, minus 1 for the non-assault movement. 7 plus 2 is 9, which is a miss. New firing with 2 firepower, plus 2. It's a miss. Leader 9 minus 1 from MH10 to MJ10. Staking on MG9 to MJ10. Mortar from MG6 to Me7. In this hex, receive an attack from the Australians, in MQ5, with 6 firepower, plus 1 for the hut, plus 1 for the CX marker, minus 1 for the non-assault movement. Ten plus 1 is 11, it's a miss, and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. Fire group in MN9 to M10, which again could not occur due to the units being in hexes with bamboo and jungle. 8 firepower, plus 1 for the rule, plus 1 for the hut, minus 1 for non-assault movement. Ten plus 1 is 11, a miss, and the machine gun loses its rate of fire. New firing of 2 firepower, plus 1. It's a miss. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. Fire from the MJ10 stack on the Australians in MN8, with 12 firepower, have due to the advancing fire phase, plus 1 by rule, plus 2 by the jungle, minus 1 by the leader. 8 plus 2 is 10, a miss. Rout phase. Half squat on MK8 to MJ8 on low crawl. Half squat in MJ9 cannot enter MJ10 due to stacking limitation and heads to MH10. Advanced phase. Half squat and leader 90 move to hex M10. Motor to MJ7. Leader 9-1 to Me10. MK6 to MK5. MJ3 to MK4. Close combat phase. No actions. Rally phase Australian turn 3. Rally phase Australian turn 3. Before starting this phase, the Japanese will try to make their last attempt to launch a 12 firepower attack against hex MQ6. And the Japanese are unable to take advantage of this advantage. Attempted auto-rally by the Australian machine gun team in Mr. 2 requiring at least 4 to recover morale, -1 for the jungle, +1 for the auto-rally, +4 for the DM marker. For +4 is 8, and the Australian unit regains its morale. Instead of the Japanese in Me10, where half squad finds itself with a leader -1. The Japanese, when together with a leader, do not suffer the action of the DM marker and, in this case, they need at least 8 to recover their morale. Remember that the morale of Japanese units together with a leader also has their morale raised by 1 point, therefore this half squad has a morale of 8. 9-1 is 8, and this half squad has its morale. Prep fire phase. Stacking on MQ5 will fire on MJ7, 7 hexes away, with 8 machine gun firepower, +1 by the hindrance determined by the scenario rules, -1 by the leader. Double 1, which would be a kill in action, and Jim, mistakenly, considers it a 2 morale check. Machine guns maintain their rate of fire. 11 + 3 to 14, the Japanese unit suffers a reduction in personnel and, at the same time, a reduction in quality, becoming a 237 squad. New shot, same parameters. 8 would be a normal morale check, which Jim disregards, and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. Machine gun in MN9 fires over MJ7 with 4 firepower, +1. It's a miss. MN8 shoots over MJ7 with 4 firepower, +1 by determination of the scenario. Hindrance of +1 over all shots above are equal to 1 hex, +1 through the palm trees in MM8. New miss. MM10 over MJ7 with 4 firepower, +1 depending on the scenario. Again, a miss. Machine gun in Mr. 6 on the same hex with the Japanese mortar with 4 firepower, +1 as determined by the scenario rule, +1 for the hut. 6 + 2 to 8 is a miss, and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. Movement phase. Crew in Mr. 2 in assault movement to Mr. 3 where they suffer an unlikely shot from MK5, 7 hexes away, with 4 firepower, 2 from the machine gun, +2 from the Japanese squad, due to the target being beyond the ideal range of the Japanese unit, which is 4 hexes. Japanese units in MK5 and MK4 cannot form a fire group, as in the Pacific Theater. Adjacent units occupying hexes with kunai, bamboo, or jungle cannot form fire groups. The modifiers are huge, with 1 more for the kunai, 3 more for the hexes with palm trees, and 1 more for determining the scenario. 10. A miss that was already expected and the machine gun lost its rate of fire. Another unlikely Mk4 shot on the Australian crew, in Mr. 3, with 4 firepower, plus 5. 6 plus 5 11, it's a miss. The Japanese still try a new shot with 2 firepower, plus 5. New miss, which was already expected. Squad at MN10 to NM10 in assault movement. Defensive fire phase. Mortar in MJ7 over the Australian unit, in the hex with bamboo in MN9, 4 hexes away, with the number to hit the target of 7, plus 1 by the hindrance determined by the scenario. 8 plus 1 to 9, the mortar does not reach the target and loses its rate of fire. The machine guns, in the huts in Mi-7 and I-8 fire on the Australians, in MN9, with 8 firepower, 6 from the machine guns, plus 2 from the squad in Mi-7. The modifiers will be, plus 1 for the scenario rule, plus 1 for the bamboo. 6 plus 2 to 8, normal morale check, miss of rate of fire for machine guns. Jim considers this shot to be a morale check which, with a result of 8, implies an erroneous break in the morale of the Australian unit. Fire group in Mk10 and J10 form a fire group. Units in jungle, bamboo, or kunai hex adjacent to hex with open terrain are allowed to form fire group. One of the light machine guns will not participate in this attack, which will be carried out with 12 firepower, plus 1 by rule, plus 2 for the jungle in MN8. 10 plus 3 to 13, a miss. At this moment, Jim discovers a Japanese half squad with broken morale in hex MJ10, which will have to wait for the next rally phase to recover its morale. Advancing fire phase. Australians at NM10 over mortars at MJ7 with 2 firepower, plus 1 by scenario rule. 5 plus 1 to 6, pin test check. The Japanese unit passes. Route phase. Crew WMMN9 to MP9. The half squad in MJ8 is forced to move again in low crawl towards the MJ9 hex, as the route possibilities are under direct vision and within the ideal range of the Australian units in Mi9 and MJ9. Advance phase. Squad in MM10 to MN9, where you will try to recover the medium machine gun in that hex in the next rally phase. With this movement, they become exhausted by entering the hex with bamboo. Mr. 6 to MQ6. Mr. 3 to Mr. 4. Squad with the medium machine gun in MQ6 moves to MR4, where it will return this machine gun to the specialized team in the next rally phase. Leader in MQ5 to Q6. Close combat phase. There is no unit capable of gaining a concealment counter, and we go to the rally phase of the Japanese phase of the 4th turn. Rally phase of the Japanese phase of the 4th round. Attempt to recover the half squad's morale by MJ10 with the help of leader 90 with a modifier of -1 for the jungle. 7 and the half squad regains morale. The Australian unit at MP9 -1 for the jungle, +4 for the DM marker. For +3 is 7 and Australians look good. The medium machine gun returns to the hands of its operators in Mr. 4. Attempt to recover morale with an auto rally in MJ9 with the +4 modifier. And the attempt fails. Prep fire phase. Mortar fire with white phosphorus ammunition on the hex with bamboo in MM9. Basic number to hit is 7, +1 for determining the scenario, -1 for the acquisition marker, +2 for being smoke ammunition. For this shot to occur, it must be equal to or less than the depletion number of this type of ammunition, which is 6. 9, which is higher than the depletion number of this type of ammunition. The -1 acquisition marker is lost. Smoke ammunition does not gain acquisition. New shot on the same hex with a modifier of +1, requiring 6 or less to hit. 3, and the target is hit with the -1 acquisition marker placed on the hex, and the mortar maintains the rate of fire. 9 -1 for the shot being from a mortar on hex with bamboo, which in the column of 2 in the infantry fire table, area target type, is a miss. New shot with mortar fire rate, requiring at least 7 to hit the hex. 11, it is a miss, and the mortar loses the rate of fire, ending its participation in this phase. Movement phase. The Japanese will launch a bonsai charge on the Australians in MN9. To do so, they will use the units in Mi9, J10 and K10 together with the leader 90. First impulse occurs with the expenditure of 1.5 movement factors. The squad in MM10 fires on the half squad in the adjacent hex. With 4 firepower, doubled to 8 due to being fired at point blank range, -1 for FFMO and -1 for FFNAM. 3 -2 is 1, kill in action, the half squad is eliminated, and a 4 residual fire counter is deposited on hex ML9. Second impulse, with total use of 3.5 movement factors. The unit that enters ML9 receives an attack of 4 residual fire, -1 by FFMO and -1 by FFNAM. 9 -2 is 7, pin test check, which has no effect as bonsai charging units are immune to ping. The Australians in MN10 could carry out a subsequent first fire, but they prefer not to do so as they predict that the Japanese will penetrate their hex in the next impulse, and, with this, they will be forced to carry out a final protective fire which could cause the breakage of their morale. New impulse, with a total expenditure of 5.5 movement factors. The squad and half squad penetrate the hex in MN10. Subsequent first fire from the Australian unit at MN10, with 2 firepower, tripled to 6, -1 from the non-assault movement, +2 from the jungle. 7 + 1 is 8, pin test check, and since the bonsai charge has been terminated for these Japanese, they are susceptible to pin test check. The half squad gets pinged. Firing at MN8 over MN9 with 8 firepower, +1 according to the scenario rules, +1 since this unit is exhausted, CX, -1 due to FFMO and -1 for FFNAM. 6, which is 1 morale check. 9 plus 1 to 10, and the Japanese squad suffers casualty reduction. This Australian unit assumes that the Japanese will not try to enter their hex, as they would become exhausted with this movement, and carries out the subsequent first fire, with 4 firepower, without modifiers. 6. Normal morale check. The Japanese squad undergoes casualty reduction, becoming a half squad 227. MN8 fires on the Japanese half squad, with 8 firepower minus 1 by FFMO, minus 1 by FFNAM, plus 1 by the scenario rules. 6 minus 1 to 5, 2 morale check. 6 plus 2 is 8, and the Japanese unit passes unscathed, as their morale is increased by 1 point for participating in the bonsai charge, and they are immune to the pin test check. 4th impulse, with a total expenditure of 7.5, with the Japanese penetrating hex MN8, ending the bonsai charge. The Japanese, who penetrated MN8, suffer a hit of 6 firepower, plus 1, plus 2 through the jungle, minus 1 FFNAM. It's a miss. Continuing with the movement phase, the unit, with the average machine gun from ME8 to MJ8, where it received a shot from MQ5, with 4 firepower, plus 1 according to the scenario rules, plus 1 for the HUD in ML7, minus 1 for FFMO, and minus 1 by FFNAM. 6. Normal morale check. The machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The Japanese pass by. New shot with the same parameters. 5. Normal morale check. The machine gun maintains the rate of fire. 5, and the Japanese pass. New shot, same parameters. It's a miss with the machine gun losing rate of fire, and the Japanese proceed to MK9. Squad with the light machine gun moves towards MK9, and on this route, they suffer from 1 residual fire in MJ8, with minus 1 for FFMO and minus 1 for FFNAM. 10 minus 2 is 8, and the Japanese will be able to proceed to MK9. Leader 9 minus 1 for MJ10. Staking in MK4 to MM5. Squad MK5 to MM5. These units are in a hex of palm groves and are protected from fire from the Australians at elevation level 1. Defensive fire phase. Stacking in MQ6 fire on the mortar with 4 firepower, plus 1 per scenario rule, plus 1 for the HUD in ML7, minus 1 for the leader. 7 plus 1 is 8, a miss, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. New shot, same parameters. It's a miss with the machine gun losing rate of fire. Advancing fire phase. Japanese at MM10 fire on the Australians in the same hex with 6 firepower, halved, 3, due to advancing fire phase, tripled, 9, due to being a point-blank shot in the same hex. The modifier is plus 2 for the jungle. It's a miss. Japanese, in MN8 fire, 2 firepower, plus 3, at the enemy, in the same hex. New miss. Route phase. MJ9 to MJ10. Advance phase. MJ8 to MK9. Squad and leader, in MM5 to MN5, positioning itself to eventually launch, in the next Japanese phase, a bonsai charge on the Australian units, on the hill, as it now has line of sight over them. Close combat phase. There is no possibility of an ambush, as the Japanese entered into close combat through a bonsai charge. In Hex MN10, the Japanese should attack with 5 firepower, the half squad is pinned, against 4 firepower of the Australians, with a ratio of 1:1, but Jim disregards this fact, and carries out a 6 against 4 attack, with a ratio of 3:2. This combat should be resolved along the lines of hand-to-hand combat, as this type of combat occurs when the attacker is Japanese and implies that it is easier to affect the opponent. In addition, the Japanese receive a -1 modifier for hand-to-hand combat. Unfortunately, Jim disregards these facts and will evaluate the fight along the normal lines of resolution. The Japanese will need 6 or less to affect the enemy. The Australians will only attack the Japanese half squad with 4 firepower against 2, a ratio of 2:1, needing at least 7 to affect the Japanese. The attack is initiated by the Japanese. 7. The attack does not affect the Australians. These attack the half squad and the result is 5, with the elimination of the half squad and these units go into melee. In MN8 the Japanese attack will be with a ratio of 1:2, requiring at least 4 to affect the Australians. These will attack the Japanese, with a ratio of 2:1 requiring at least 7 to affect them. Starting the fight, with the Japanese who, with a result of 3, eliminate the Australian squad. Before this, the Australians can launch the attack. 6, and half squad is also eliminated. The end result of this close combat phase is the miss of 3 half squads by the Japanese and 1 squad by the Australians. So far, the Japanese have lost the equivalent of 4 squads and an 80 leader, while the Australians have lost the equivalent of 2 squads and a 70 leader. Finally, the Australian units in MP9 place themselves under the concealment marker. The Japanese in MM8 receive the concealment marker as there are no Australian units in good order in their line of sight. Rally phase of the Australian phase of the 4th round. The Australians will try to recover the machine gun in Hex MN9. As this Hex is jungle, a modifier of +1 will be added to the dice result, and as the squad that will attempt to recover the machine gun is exhausted, +1 will be added as well. Therefore, 1 die will be rolled with a modifier of +2, requiring 3 or less to recover the machine gun. 4 and the machine gun is not recovered. Attempt to rally in MJ10 with modifiers -1 for the leader, -1 for the jungle. The +4 modifier for the DM marker does not apply in the case of Japanese units accompanied by the leader. 9-2 is 7, and the unit recovers morale. Prep fire phase. Firing from MQ6 over MN5 with 4 machine gun firepower +1 according to the scenario rule, -1 for the leader. 9. A miss and the machine gun loses its rate of fire. Shooting from MQ5 over MN5 with 4 firepower, +1. 7 + 1 is 8. A miss and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. New shot with the same parameters. 8 + 1 is 9. New miss, maintenance of rate of fire. New shot, same parameters. Double 3. New miss, maintenance of rate of fire. New shot, same parameters. 6 + 1 is 7, which is pin test check for the Japanese squad. Japanese leaders are not affected by the pin test. The Japanese pass by. Movement phase. The CX marker is removed from the squad in MN9, which moves to MN10. Stacking at MP9 shifts towards MS7. At this displacement, it is shot from the stack with the leader 80, 5 hexes away with 4 firepower, +1 according to the scenario rule, +1 as the shot passes over the kunai representation in MP6. Three + 2 is 5, 1 morale check and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The Australian leader breaks. The squad also breaks, but Jim ignores this and considers the unit pinned. The Australian unit has higher morale than the Australian leader who broke, and it is not necessary to subject them to pin test check for leader breakage. The injured Australian leader should have his morale and modifiers reduced and also have to roll 1 die to assess the severity of the injury. If the result is 5 or 6, the leader is eliminated. A new shot is not possible as there are Australian units that are closer in MQ6, and the Australians spend only 1.5 movement factors to enter the current hex, and can only be attacked once. Subsequent first fire, with 4 firepower, +1 by scenario rule, +1 by height advantage. It's a miss. Shooting from MM5 on Mr. 8, 6 hexes away, with 4 firepower, +1 according to the scenario rule. 5 + 1 is 6, normal morale check. The Australian leader passes the test of the severity of his injury. Even so, it is not known why, in a clear favor for the Japanese, and considers the leader eliminated and the crew with broken morale. Continuing the movement phase, squad in Mr. 4 to MQ5 in assault movement. In this hex, he is attacked by the mortar in MG7, 7 hexes away, requiring the basic number to hit the target of 7, +1 according to the scenario rule. 6 + 1 = 7, the target is hit, the mortar loses its rate of fire and the -1 acquisition marker is deposited on the attack hex. Pin test check that the squad passes. Medium machine gun from Mr. 4 to MQ6. The Australian leader moves from Mr. 4 to Mr. 2 to be able to assist in recovering the morale of Australian units that have their morale broken in the high area of the hill, which will have the Mr. 2 hex as the preferred route location. Squad from MN10 to MM10, going into melee, and this should not have happened in the movement phase, only at advanced fire phase. Defensive fire phase. Stacking in MK9 will fire on units, in melee, at MM10, with 8 firepower, plus 1 by scenario rule, plus 2 by jungle. Six plus 3 is 9, which is a ping test check, and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. The Japanese squad passes. Advancing fire phase. Squad in MQ5 fires over MN5 with 4 firepower, reduced by half by the advancing fire phase, plus 1 by scenario definition. It's a miss. Route phase. Squad broken at Mr. 8 to MP9. Advance phase. Now the squad in MN10 can move and enter close combat in MM10. Close combat. Let's resolve the melee in MM10, where the Australians attack with a ratio of 2 to 1, requiring at least 7 to affect the Japanese. These will attack one of the Australian squads with a 1 to 1 ratio, requiring at least 5 to affect the Japanese. Starting with the Australians, who with 8 do not affect the Japanese. Japanese shot 9, no effect, and these units persist in melee. At this point, we will end this episode, with the Japanese forces depleted after the intense battles in which they participated. These forces lost 4 equivalent squads and a leader, in addition to 2 squads reduced to half squads, almost half of their total strength. The Australians lost 2 equivalent squads and 270 leaders, around 1/4 of their strength, and find themselves in excellent defensive positions to prevent the Japanese victory condition of the scenario, which is to occupy the hills without the presence of Australian units in good order in that sector. With only 3 turns left in the scenario, the Japanese will go all out and will certainly launch a bonsai charge on the Australians at the edge of the hills in MQ5 and Q6. That said, Jim says goodbye and thanks your select audience. Namaste. In this episode, which will deal with the 5th round, in which Japanese forces come dangerously close to Australian defensive positions in the hills and must subject these positions to extreme pressure. In the southern position, the Australian positions are being overrun by the Japanese, who find themselves in melee with the Australian units in good order position there. Rally phase. Japanese, turn 5. Prep fire phase. Mortar in J7 fires at the Australian stack, 7 hexes away, requiring the basic number to hit the target, with modifiers of +1 depending on the scenario, -1 by the -1 acquisition marker. The target is hit, and the mortar loses its rate of fire. The effect of this shot will run on column 2 firepower. 8, and it's a miss. Movement phase. Unit with the medium machine gun from K9 to L7. Half squad from M8 to N8, using 2 movement factors, spending another 1 movement factor to try to rescue the machine gun in N8, needing 4 or less to gain possession of the machine gun. 6 and the machine gun is not recovered. Staking from J10 to M9. K9 to L9. Leader from L10 to L9. Japanese reinforcements to the north will launch a bonsai charge on the Australians in Q6. First boost spending 1.5 movement factors. The Australians take no action, and the Japanese move on to the second impulse, spending a total of 3.5 movement factors. Machine gun fire in Q6 on the Japanese next to the leader. 8 machine gun firepower doubled to 16 as it is fired at close range, -1 for FFNAM. The presence of kunai in this hex eliminates the possibility of FFMO, -1 for the leader, +1 due to scenario determination. An 8 residual fire counter is deposited on the hex. 10 and it is a normal morale check, and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. 11 and the Japanese leader is injured and suffers a reduction in quality and must undergo an assessment to assess the severity of the injury. If the result on the die is 5 or 6, the leader will be eliminated. 3. The leader is spared. The Japanese squad passes. Subsequent first fire with machine guns, using the so-called sustained fire, with half the firepower, 8, and the number of machine gun breaks becomes 10, and for elimination it becomes 12, with a modifier of -1. Bad result, 11 which is a miss, and the machine guns become malfunctioning. Squad in Q5 fires on Japanese units in P6. For firepower, -1 by FFNAM, +1 by scenario determination. 8 and it's a miss. Subsequent first fire with 2 firepower without modifiers. 8 and it's a new miss. Third impulse, spending a total of 7.5 movement factors, moving the squad from P6 to Q6, ending this squad's participation in this bonsai charge. This unit should suffer a final protective fire from the Australian units, with half the intrinsic firepower of the crews, 2 firepower, tripled, 6 firepower, due to being fired at close range from the same hex. The Japanese leader chooses not to advance and remains in this hex. Squads in O5 and O6 advance to P5 where they suffer an attack with 8 machine gun firepower, -1 by FFNAM, +1 by the scenario rules. 8. Normal morale check. The machine gun maintains the rate of fire. One of the Japanese squads suffers casualty reduction. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. Shooting from P5 over Q5, with 6 firepower, +1 depending on the scenario, +1 due to the height advantage. Nine plus 2 is 11, a miss. Finally, Jim corrects a pending situation, which is the final protective fire of the Australians over the Japanese, with 6 firepower, +1 for the kunai, -1 for the FFNAM, -1 for the leader. 6 minus 1 is 5, a morale check. And the Japanese squad suffers a casualty reduction. Now it's time for the Japanese squad to shoot in Q6 over the Australians in the same hex, with 4 firepower, +1 for kunai. 11 and it's a miss. L7 shooting over Q5, with 2 firepower, +1 for the scenario rule, +1 for the height advantage. 8, a miss. Route phase. No actions. Advance phase. P5 to Q5 entering close combat. In a gross error against the Australians, Jim overstacks the M10 hex with 2.5 squad equivalent, when the maximum allowed in dense jungle hex is 2 squad equivalents. Leader 90 from L9 to M9. And 8 to 09 causing the crew in hex P9 to return to being under the DM marker. Close combat. Starting with hex N10, where the Japanese will attack the 2 Australian squads with 11 in a 1-to-1 ratio. As the Japanese are the attackers, they declare hand-to-hand combat. With this, the attacks will be resolved using the red line of hand-to-hand combat. They will receive 1 less modifier for being Japanese in hand-to-hand. This way, the Japanese will need at least 7 to affect the Australians. The Australians will attack with 8 firepower, with a ratio of 1 to 2, needing at least 6 to affect the Japanese. The Japanese attack first, and with a result of 6, they eliminate the Australian squads. Before this elimination occurred, this attack did not occur under ambush, and occurs concomitantly and not sequentially, so the Australians can carry out their attack. 3. And all Japanese stacking is also eliminated. Let's go to hex Q6, where the combat will take place hand-to-hand, as the Japanese are the attackers. There is no ambush, as the Japanese penetrated this hex during the bonsai charge. Japanese attack 3 against 5 by the Australians, 1-to-2 ratio with a -1 modifier, requiring at least 7 to affect the Australians, who attack with 5 against 3, in a 3-to-2 ratio, with a -1 modifier, by the leader, requiring at least 9 to affect the Japanese. Six minus 1 is 5, and Jim should have used the -1 modifier for the Japanese result and considers it just a casualty reduction of 1 of the Australian units, while the result should have been the elimination of the Australians. The Australians get the result of 6 minus 1, eliminating the Japanese squad. One of the Australian crews suffers casualty reduction and is eliminated, while the Australian leader is injured and has his quality and morale reduced. When assessing the severity of the leader's injury, the injury was considered serious, and the Australian leader was eliminated. The Australian unit should undergo a morale check due to the miss of leader, LLMC, which Jim does not perform. The Japanese penetrated hex Q5 in the advance phase, so let's check for an ambush. The modifiers for this ambush will be: for the Japanese, we will have +1 for the attack occurring against a jungle hex, -1 for being stealthy. Australians will have a -1 modifier determined by scenario conditions. 2 for the Japanese and 3 -1 for the Australians. 2. The ambush does not occur and the close combat will be concomitant. The Japanese attack with 7 against the Australian 6, with a ratio of 1:1, -1 because the attack is resolved hand-to-hand, requiring at least 8 to affect the Australians. The Australians will attack with 6 against 7 of the Japanese, in a ratio of 1:2, without modifiers, needing at least 6 to affect the Japanese. Japanese attack 9-1 is 8 and the Australians are unaffected. Australian attack 9 and Japanese units are also unaffected, and they go into melee. And let's go to the rally phase of the Australian phase of the 5th round. Rally phase Australian turn 5. Attempted unit auto rally in P9, requiring at least 4 to recover morale. The crew fails. Crew in Q6 attempt to recover the function of the medium machine gun under his possession, which did not happen. Prep fire phase. Crew in Q6 fires on the leader in the adjacent hex, with 4 firepower, +1 by terrain determination. 6 +1 is 7, which would be a ping test check, to which leaders are immune, and even so, Jim insists and makes the leader ping. Movement phase. Leader in R2 to V3, moving away from the center of the battles, by moving to the opposite side of the hills, and will be able to satisfy the Australians' victory condition, which is to have at least 1 unit in good order in level 1 hex. Defensive fire phase. Firing from 09 on P9, with 4 firepower, +2 for the jungle, +1 depending on the scenario. 7 + 3 is 10, which is a miss. Shooting with the L7 medium machine gun over Q6, with 4 firepower, +1 depending on the scenario, +1 due to the height advantage. 2. The Japanese suffer cowering and the assessment of the effects of this shot is made in column 2. For +2 is 6, pin test check. The Australians pass. New shot, same parameters. 8 + 2 is 10, a miss, and the machine gun loses its rate of fire. Shot from the mortar on hex Q6, requiring a basic number of 7 to reach the hex, +1 depending on the scenario. 10. The target is not hit, and the mortar loses its rate of fire. Advancing fire phase. No actions. Rout phase. The unit in P9 moves towards hex T10, which it cannot penetrate as it requires 6.5 movement factors, and only has 6 available. Advance phase. The Australian crew in Q6 goes all or nothing and advances to melee in Q6. The leader in V3 moves to W4. And let's go to close combat. The focus is the clash in Q5, which will certainly be a determining factor in victory for one of the factions. Australian attack with 8 against 7 from the Japanese, with a 1-to-1 ratio, requiring at least 5 to affect the enemy, while the enemy will need at least 4 to affect the Australians. It is not melee. Australian attack, which with a fantastic double, 1 eliminates the Japanese squads, with the possible creation of an Australian leader. The Japanese get 4, which will cause a casualty reduction in Australian forces. One of the Australian crews is eliminated. Rally phase, Japanese phase of the 6th round. Attempted auto rally by the crew in T9, requiring 4 or less to achieve the rally. The auto rally does not occur. Attempted possession of the medium machine gun in Q6, which is successful. Prep fire phase. No actions. Movement phase. Team with the machine guns at L7 become exhausted, CX, and move to O7. The Japanese in J7 abandon the mortar and also become exhausted and move to M7. Leader 9-0, from M9 to O7. Half squad in O9 becomes exhausted and moves to S10. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. Unit in S10 fires on adjacent Australians, with 2 firepower, +1 per scenario rule, +1 due to the unit being exhausted. Nine is a miss. Route phase. T9 to V10. Advance phase. S10 to T10. O7 to P6. M7 to N6. Close combat. No actions. Australian round 6 rally phase. Jim had forgotten about creating an Australian leader in the last close combat, and a 7-0 leader is created. Attempt to auto-rally in V10, requiring at least 4 to succeed. 4 and the crew regains morale. Prep fire phase. No actions. Movement phase. Stacking from R4 to V4, moving away from Japanese forces. Leader 8-0 for W7. Crew V10 becomes exhausted, CX, and heads towards the hills, along a longer route, through hexes W9, by FFNAM. For -1 equals 3, which is a morale check. The crew passes and heads to W8. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. No actions. Rout phase. No actions. Advance phase. V4 to W5, moving further away from the Japanese attackers. W7 and W8 for V8. Close combat phase. No actions. And we arrive at the rally phase of the last round, the 7th, in which the Japanese realize that it will be impossible to destroy the Australian units that have positioned themselves on the hills, finally granting victory to the Australians. In this battle, the Japanese lost the equivalent of 10 squads out of the original 12.5, with all remaining units in the scenario reduced in some way. In addition, the leaders 9-1 and 8-0 lost. The Australians lost the equivalent of 5 squads of the original 8, also losing the leader 9-1 and 2 leaders 7-0. Jim made a ton of mistakes, which should be fixed in the next version of this battle. As lessons from this episode, we realized that the Japanese approach towards the Australian positions in the southern portion of the map took place through terrain with little cover, which allowed firing in favorable conditions by the Australians, with the reduction of numerous units. In the next version, Jim intends to make this approach predominantly from the north, where he will have generous protection by kunai and hexes with palm trees. With that, Jim says goodbye. Namaste. Hello friends, here we are trying to avenge the Japanese in this second attempt to dominate the Australian defensive positions on the hill. In the first attempt, which was unsuccessful for the Japanese, the strategy used was to advance in a broad front across the entire length of the map, with the dilution of firepower preventing a greater concentration of their forces on enemy stacks. In this episode, the Japanese will radically modify their tactics, and will concentrate their units and resources in the northern, upper, half of the scenario, approaching the Australian defensive positions in a way that is more protected by kunai hexes and fundamentally by the presence of palm trees, which will protect Japanese units until very close to Australian positions. For the southern half, the Japanese will form a base of fire consisting of the leader 9-1 together with the team with the medium machine gun and a squad with a light machine gun. The mortar group should also move through this sector, whose main function will be to try to lay smoke screens to obstruct any shots fired by the Australians at the advancing units. The Australians will maintain the tactics of previous episodes, concentrating firepower on the hill, the Japanese objective. Some advanced groups will be placed in the forest areas in both the north and south of the scenario to try to delay the Japanese advance as much as possible. Let's get started, starting with the positioning of the Australian units. The first units to be positioned are the two half-squad together with leader 70, who are in hex L7 in the hut. The groups with machine guns will be placed in hexes distributed along the crest of the hill. This spread of these units will be since the Japanese have at least 3 chances to carry out an attack with 12 firepower, without modifiers, on a hex of their choice during their rally phase. With this, the Australians will reduce the risk related to stacking several units in the same hex. The leader 9-1 together with a squad will reside in hex R5. In the northern portion of the scenario, hexes R1 and R2 will receive a squad each where they will be together with leader It0. To the south, one squad will be positioned in the bamboo hex at N9 and another in the dense jungle hex at N8. In that sector there will be a 7-0 leader. Finally, all Australian stacks and units receive a concealment marker as determined by the scenario. Now let's go to the Japanese. Japanese units must be positioned to the west, left of column G, inclusive. The fire base is formed with the leader 9-1 accompanied by the medium machine gun and a squad with the medium machine gun, and they will start this battle in hex G4. The mortar group will be placed in hex G6. A stack with 3 squads will start the battle in front of the kunai area in hex G2. And finally, in G3 the leader AT will be stacked next to the squad with the light machine gun. And let's go to rally phase of the Japanese phase of the first round. To start, the Japanese will try to fire the barrage with 12 firepower on the Q6 hex, requiring a roll of 1 or 2 to hit the Australians. 2. And the hex is hit and will suffer an attack with number 12 firepower modifiers. Nine in the 12 firepower column is a normal morale check, causing Australian units to lose the concealment marker. 6 and the Australian unit passes the morale check. Prep fire phase. The Japanese mortar will come into action and will try to lay a smoke screen in hex 06, 8 hexes away, requiring a base result of 7 to hit the target, +1 for the HUD in case 6, +1 for scenario determination, +2 for being smoke ammo, with the required result of at least 7 to hit the hex. The target is hit, and the mortar maintains the rate of fire, and a +3 smoke marker is deposited on hex 06, and the Japanese unit continues with their ability to fire with smoke ammunition. New attempt, now to create a smoke screen, an L6, basic number of 7 to hit the hex, +2, 9, for being smoke ammunition, -1, for the hut in I-10, -1 due to scenario determination. Six, the smoke counter is deposited in the hex. The mortar maintains the rate of fire. Movement phase. Stacking with leader, 9-1 moves to J5. The Australian unit relinquishes the concealment marker and will attempt a first defensive fire on the Japanese at J5. However, when drawing the line of fire to the target, this line crosses the hex of palm trees in M5, which blocks the view of the hex occupied by the Japanese. A dice roll is made just to assess if the machine gun becomes non-functional. The Japanese to the north become exhausted and move to K2 and J3, respectively. Remember that hexes with open terrain in this scenario cost 1.5 movement factors to enter. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. Stacks at J5 fire at the Australians at L7 with 10 firepower, have by advancing fire phase 5, have again by the Australian unit's concealment marker 2, +1 by the hut at K6, +1 by scenario definition, +1 for the hut in L7, -1 for the leader -1. And it's a miss. Route phase. No actions. Advance phase. G6 to H5. K2 to L2. J3 to K3. Close combat phase. There is no close combat, and we will determine which units qualify to receive the concealment marker. The unit in Q5 qualifies to receive the concealment marker. Rally phase of the Australian phase of the first round. No actions. Prep fire phase. No action, as the Australians intend to maintain the concealment markers for as long as possible. Movement phase. The stack in J7 gives up the concealment marker, becomes exhausted, CX, and takes advantage of the smoke in hex L6 and moves, in a protected manner, towards the hill, to reinforce the friendly units in that sector that will receive the greatest brunt of the Japanese attack. This unit moves without any complications until hex Q8. The machine gun group in Q6 moves to R5, where it intends to recover the concealment marker in the next close combat phase. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. No actions. Route phase. No actions. Advance phase. Q8 to Q7. Close combat phase. The squad in R5 recovers the concealment marker. Rally phase of the Japanese phase of the second round. Japanese attempt to attack with 12 firepower on hex Q5, requiring 1 or 2 in the result of 1 die for the attack to happen. The attack does not happen. Prep fire phase. Smoke counters revert to their +2 phase. Shot from J5 on N9 with 8 firepower, +1 for the hut in K6, +1 as determined by the scenario, +1 for the bamboo in N9, -1 for the Japanese leader. Eight plus 3 is 11, it's a miss, and the average machine gun loses the rate of fire. Mortar will attempt to fire on N9, requiring a base result of 7 to hit the hex, +1 depending on the scenario. 7 + 1 is 8, it is a miss, and the mortar loses the rate of fire, with the placement of the -1 acquisition marker on the hex. Movement phase. At this phase, the Japanese reinforcements will enter the scenario, and they will do so in the northern portion of the scenario, where the squads will form a stack with the 2 Japanese leaders, becoming exhausted, and will advance through the kunai field to hexes E1 and E2. Units in hexes L2 and K3 lose the CX marker and advance to M2 and M3 respectively. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. M2 fire on R1 with 12 firepower, reduced by half, 6, due to advancing fire, reduced by half again due to the target being beyond the ideal firing range, 3, reduced by half by the concealment marker, 1. The modifiers will be +1 for determining the scenario, +1 for the palm grove in P1, +2 for the dense jungle. It's a miss. Route phase. No actions. Advance phase. J5 to K6. H5 to I6. M2 to N2. M3 to N3. E1 to F1. E2 to F2. Close combat phase. No actions. The Japanese units on F2 and F3 received the concealment marker. There are 6 hexes with hindrances between these units and the Australians on R1 and R2. Rally phase of the Australian phase of the second round. No actions. Prep fire phase. No actions. Movement phase. N8 to O8. Stacking with the leader 7-0, from Q7 to R5, losing the CX marker. Medium machine gun from R5 to Q6. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. No actions. Rout phase. No actions. Advance phase. No actions. Close combat phase. Stacking on R5 recovers the hiding marker and we move on to rally phase of the Japanese phase of the third round. With this we close this episode with the first 2 rounds of this battle, where no major events took place. These shifts were characterized by the Japanese advancing through protected hexes and progressively approaching Australian defensive positions. This advance took place along paths with a large number of hindrances, making firing very ineffective on both sides. The Japanese already have a fire base in K6 which, with the elimination of the smoke screen in the next prep fire phase, will greatly improve the chances of this group hitting the Australian units on the hill and in the jungle to the south. In the northern portion of the scenario, the Japanese further forward must remain in the positions they currently occupy, awaiting the arrival of reinforcements that are on the way. The Australians, in turn, tried to maintain the concealment markers as much as possible, and this must be this faction's strategy, as time plays in their favor. This concludes this episode, hoping that in the next video, the Japanese will be able to reach a position from which they will be able to launch the fearsome banzai charges on the Australian units on the hill and in the forest sector at the northern end of this position. Namaste. Rally phase of the Japanese phase of the third turn. The Japanese will make use of the last opportunity to attack with 12 firepower on a hex of their choice, which will be hex Q6 on the hill, requiring a 1 or 2 when rolling a die. 6 and the shot has no effect. Prep fire phase. Smoke markers are removed. The mortar in I6 will try to launch a new smoke screen over hex O6, requiring a basic result of 7 to achieve, +2 for launching with smoke ammunition, 9, -1 for determining the scenario, -1 for the HUD in K6, result of 7 or less to hit the hex. 4. The target is hit, and the mortar retains ammunition with smoke, the depletion number of this ammunition is 7. The mortar should have lost its rate of fire, but Jim disregards this fact and makes another attempt to release smoke at N6, requiring at least 7 as a dice result. 7. The smoke maker is deposited on N6 and this ammunition is exhausted from this moment on. Movement phase. Leader together with the crew with the medium machine gun moves to K7 where it suffers a first defensive fire from a fire group formed by Australian squads in N8 and O8, which is illegal, as these units are in hexes with dense jungle. In any case, this shot will be with 8 firepower, +1 for the hex with palm trees in M8, the hex with the hut in L7 and +1 depending on the scenario, -1 for the non-assault movement. Seven +2 is 9, pin test check. The Japanese leaders are immune to the pin test, and the machine gun crew passes. Subsequent first fire with 4 firepower. 7 +2 is 9, it's a miss, and this stack advances to L7 in assault movement. Shooting with the medium machine gun at P6 over L7 with 4 firepower, +1 depending on the scenario, +1 for the hut. 5 +2 is 7, pin test check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. 9 and the machine gun crew is not pinned as its morale is increased by 1 by the Japanese leader, in addition to having -1 of this leader's modifier. New shot with the same parameters. 10 plus 2 is 12, and it's a miss. Squad from K6 to L7. Stacking from F1 to J1, losing the exhaustion marker, CX. Stacking from F2 to J2, also losing the exhaustion marker. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. Stacking with machine guns, in L7 fires, on N9, with 8 firepower, squad plus medium machine gun, with 8 firepower, reduced by half due to advancing fire, +1 for the Palm Grove, +1 by determining the scenario, +2 for the dense jungle, -1 for the Japanese leader, -1. Nine plus 3 is 11, a miss, and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. Route phase. No actions. Advance phase. J2 to K3. J1 to K2. Mortar from I6 to J6. Close combat phase. No actions. Rally phase. Australian turn 3. Rally phase. Australian turn 3. No actions. Prep fire phase. An illegal fire group was formed again, with units N8 and O8 on the Japanese stack in L7, with 8 firepower, +1 according to the scenario rule, +1 for the Palm Grove, +1 for the hut. 10 plus 3 is 13, a miss fortunately, as it was an illegal attack. Shooting with the machine gun, at R6, over L7, with 4 firepower, +2, scenario rule and hut. Eight plus 2 is 10, a miss, and the machine gun loses its rate of fire. Movement phase. No actions. Defensive fire phase. Stack on L7 fires, on N8, with 8 firepower, medium machine gun and infantry firepower, +3, Palm Grove, scenario rule, dense jungle, -1, for Japanese leader modifier. 5 plus 3 is 8, normal morale check, with the miss of the medium machine gun's rate of fire. Seven and the Australian squad is pinned. Attempt to fire with white phosphorus ammunition on O8, requiring 7 to reach the hex, base number of 9, it is smoke ammunition, -1 for the hut in L7 and -1 depending on the scenario. 9. There is no this type of ammunition available, so the shot did not occur. New shot with HE ammunition, requiring a final result of 7 to hit the target. 11. The target is not hit, the mortar loses its rate of fire, and an additional 1 acquisition marker is deposited on the hex. Advancing fire phase. No actions. Route phase. No actions. Advance phase. Machine gun from R4 to Q5, keeping the concealment marker. Leader 7-0 and the 2 half squads, from R5 to R4. Leader 9-1 and squad, from R5 to Q6. Medium machine gun from R6 to R5. Close combat phase. The medium machine gun on R5 recovers the concealment marker. Rally phase of the Japanese stage of the 4th turn. No actions. Prep fire phase. Mortar in N6 fires on 08, requiring a base result of 7 to reach the hex, +1 by the scenario rule, +1 for the hut in L7, +1 for the palm grove in M8, -1 for the -1 acquisition marker. 11 + 2 is 13, a miss with the mortar losing its rate of fire, and the marker is turned towards the face of -2 acquisition. Smoke markers face +2. Stacking with leader 9-1 shoots, with 8 firepower, +4, 2 for dense jungle, +1 for palm grove, +1 for scenario rule, -1 for Japanese leader. Two + 3 is 5, 2 morale check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. 5 + 2 = 7, and the Australian squad is pinned. New firing with machine guns, with 6 firepower +3. 4 + 3 is 7, pin test check, and the medium machine gun maintains rate of fire. The Australian squad is already pinned, so it was an ineffective shot. New firing with the medium machine gun with 4 firepower, +3. 10 + 3 is 13, a miss, and the medium machine gun loses the rate of fire. Movement phase. K3 to M4. K2 advances to M3. Defensive fire phase. Once again, Jim's insistence on forming an illegal fire group manifests itself, with the squads in N8 and 08 having 6 firepower +3 over the Japanese stack in L7. 7 + 3 is 10, a miss. Advancing fire phase. New illegal fire group with units in N2, M3 and M4. M3 and M4 hexes are hexes with kunai and cannot form fire groups. If the squad in N2 participated in the fire group, this would be cool, but Jim didn't include it for fear of the possibility of cowering, as it would exclude the leaders from directing this fire. 32 firepower, halved, 16, by being advanced fire, halved again, by the Australian unit's concealment marker, on R2, to 8 firepower, +5. 8 + 5 is 11, and it's a miss. Route phase. No actions. Advance phase. Staking from L7 to M8. J6 to K7. N3 to O4. N2 distributes between O2 and O3. M4 to N4. M3 to N3. Close combat phase. No actions. Rally phase of the Australian 4th turn. No actions. Prep fire phase. Stacking in Q6, shoots over the Japanese, stacking in M8. With 8 firepower, +1 for the scenario, -1 for the Australian leader. (11) and it is a miss, with the machine gun losing its rate of fire. Fire group in R4 and Q5 fire on the Japanese stack in O3. With 12 firepower, +1. 9 +1 is 10, normal morale check, with the machine guns losing their rate of fire. One of the Japanese units is pinned, and the rest passed the morale check. Movement phase. With more than half of the scenario completed, the Australians decide to withdraw their units from the front line, positioning them in a way that they believe could harm the Japanese's next movements towards the objective of dominating the hill. R2 and R1 for T1. O8 and N8 to O9. Defensive fire phase. Fire group O3, O4 and N4 over the Australians in Q6. 16 firepower, only the firepower of the infantry in these hexes minus the firepower of the unit pinned in O3, +1 by scenario determination, +1 by the height advantage of Q6. 11 +2 is 13, which is a miss. New shot, which could not have occurred as it will happen on the same hex from the same attacking hexes. 6 firepower, medium machine guns and squad pinned, +2. 5 +2 is 7, normal morale check and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. One of the crews becomes pinned and the other suffers casualty reduction and is eliminated. Advancing fire phase. No actions. Rout phase. No actions. Advance phase. T1 to U2, from where it will be possible to engage the Japanese units that advance on the Australian units on the hill, and, if everything goes wrong, these units can move to the eastern limit of the hills from where they can advance on the hill, overcoming the battle. O9 to P9. R5 to Q5. Half squad with leader 70 from R4 to Q5, where he will try to recover the medium machine gun. Half squad from R4 to S5. Close combat phase. Half squad in S5 and the stack in P9 receive the concealment markers. The pin markers are removed, and we move on to the rally phase of the Japanese phase of the 5th turn. In this episode, the Japanese achieved their main objective, which was to get close to the Australian units on the hill with the full integrity of their forces, and now they will be able to launch ferocious bonsai charges on the Australian defenders on the crest of the hill. The Japanese have 3 more full turns to carry out their intentions. The Australians are trying to protect themselves as best they can, and have already moved a step towards the east, in U2, from where they will be able to help their compatriots on the hill and, in case of failure, head to the edge of the hilly area and snatch victory in the last turn. With this we close this episode, and we move towards the outcome of this fantastic rematch between the Japanese and the Australian forces. Namaste. In this fifth turn, the Japanese have already satisfactorily approached the enemy's defensive positions in the northern portion of the scenario without misses in personnel, and must immediately launch a bonsai charge against the Australians in the hills. In the southern portion of the scenario, the Japanese firebase did not cause damage to the Australians in that sector but is positioned in such a way as to prevent the eventual displacement of the Australian station in the area towards the hill axis, preventing reinforcements from reaching the Australian station there. So, let's look at this attempt by the Japanese to surpass the Australians. Rally phase 5th turn of the Japanese phase. Australian half squad will attempt to recover the machine gun abandoned in Q5, requiring a result of 3 or less to recover this support weapon, +2 for the kunai hex. And the machine gun is recovered. Prep fire phase. No actions. Movement phase. The Japanese will finally launch a massive bonsai charge against the Australian defences in Q5 using the squads and leaders in the hexes O3, O4, N3, N4 and M4. First impulse by spending 1.5 movement factors. Medium machine gun fire in Q5 over the Japanese, in P4, with 8 firepower, -2, FFMO, FFNAM, +1 by scenario rule. -1 is 5, 2 morale check and the medium machine gun loses the rate of fire, and a 4 residual fire counter is deposited on the attack hex. Nine +2 is 11 and the Japanese squad undergoes stat reduction, becoming 347. New attack with the other medium machine gun, with 8 firepower, -1. 6-1 is 5, 2 morale check with the machine gun, maintains the rate of fire. Nine +2 is 11 and the Japanese squad becomes half squad. New machine gun fire, 8 firepower -1. 7-1 is 6, 1 morale check, the machine gun loses its rate of fire. 9 +2 is 11, and the Japanese half squad breaks, being placed under the DM marker. Second impulse, with a total expenditure of 2.5 movement factors. The Japanese stack that penetrated hex P4 will suffer an attack of 4 residual fire, -2, FFMO, FFNAM. 5-2 is 3, 2 morale check. All Japanese units pass. The Australians, under the concealment marker, in Q5, give up this marker and carry out an attack on the Japanese stack, in Q4, with 8 firepower, -2, FFMO, FFNAM, +1 as determined by the scenario rules. For -1 is 3, casualty reduction and 2 morale check, with the machine gun losing its rate of fire. One of the squads immediately suffers a stat reduction, becoming 347, and all will suffer 2 morale checks. All squads break and undergo stat reduction, with one of the squads becoming half squad. New firing with the same parameters, 8 firepower -1. 5 -1 is 4, 2 morale check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The half squad breaks and with a double 6, is eliminated from the scenario. New shot, same parameters. For -1 is 3, new casualty reduction, with one of the squads becoming half squad, and both will suffer 2 morale check. The machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The remaining squad becomes half squad. Half squad breaks. The machine gun will take advantage of maintaining the rate of fire and attack the Japanese stack in hex P4 with 8 firepower, -1. Ten -1 is 9, which is pin test check, to which Japanese units are immune, and the machine gun loses fire rate. First defensive fire, from U2 over P4, with 8 firepower, -1. Six -1 is 5, 2 morale check. The Japanese leader passes. This unit's morale rises from 9 to 10, for participating in the bonsai charge. The squad breaks above the ALR and suffers stat and quality reductions, becoming a second-class squad 2-3-7. The second squad undergoes stat reduction. Subsequent first fire illegal, as this could only occur against the enemy unit closest to the attacker, which in this case would be the half squad in Q4. Anyway, for firepower -1 over P4. 3 -1 is 2, which is a casualty reduction, and the units must pass 2 morale checks. Random dice rolling will be performed to determine which unit will undergo casualty reduction. Attack from the Australian stack in Q6 on P5 with 16 firepower, -2, FFNAM, leader. The hex with kunai prevents FFMO, +1 according to the scenario rule. 10 -2 is 8, 1 morale check, and the machine gun loses the rate of fire. The Japanese squad passes. P9 shooting over P5, with 8 firepower, -1, FFNAM, +1 for the scenario, +1 for the kunai in P6. Nine +1 is 10, a miss. New shot with 4 firepower, +1. Nine, a miss. Third impulse, with a total expenditure of 7.5 movement factors, stacking in P4 spans, 4 movement factors, to penetrate Q6, ending this bonsai charge. This unit will suffer a final protective fire from the units with the machine gun in this hex, which will carry out the so-called sustained fire from the machine guns, rate of fire absent, malfunctioning number lowered to 10. This attack will have 12 FPE, reduced by half, 6, as it is a final protective fire, tripled to 18 as it is a triple point-blank fire, with a shot of 16 firepower, -1, FFNAM. For -1 would be a result of 3, however, Jim considers this shot to result in 5, and it is a 3 morale check. The Japanese leader fails the morale test and is injured, becoming an 8+1 leader. The squad becomes half squad, and the half squad has its morale broken, falling under the DM marker. Jim forgets to assess the severity of the Japanese leader's injury, who could have been eliminated. S5 fires over R4 with 4 firepower, -2, FFMO, FFNAM. Double 4 is 8, -2 is 6, and Jim forgets that Australian units do not suffer cowering due to the scenario rules and evaluates this shot in the 2 firepower column, which is a pin test check. Half squad passes. Subsequent first fire, with 2 firepower, -2. 5 -2 is 3, 1 morale check. 9 +1 is 10 and the half squad's morale is broken. Continuing the movement phase. Stack O2 for Q2. Leader in N2 for Q2. Stacking in M8 to O8. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advanced fire phase. The Japanese units that penetrated Q5 fire 6 unmodified firepower at the Australians in this hex. It's a miss. Shooting P6 over Q6 with 6 firepower, +1, height advantage, +1 per scenario rule. It is a miss, and the machine gun becomes more functioning. Shooting P5 against Q6 with 4 firepower, +1. For +1 is 5, 1 morale check. Australian units pass through. Stacking in O8 on Q5 with 4 firepower, +1 for scenery, +1 for height advantage. And it's a miss. Stacking in Q2 fires, on the Q6 hex, with 8 firepower, +1 per scenario definition, +1 for the height advantage. Three plus 2 is 5, 1 morale check. The Australian leader gets pinged. The half squad has its morale broken. The machine gun crew passes. As the Japanese units in this hex are not yet in close combat, the Japanese units do not suffer from this attack. Route phase. Q4 to R2. R4 to R3 in low crawl to avoid being interdicted from U2. The Japanese half squad in Q5 is eliminated due to a failed route. They cannot move except to the hex adjacent to enemies in good order. Q6 to T5 and Jim is unsure whether this move can be made, as in R5 this unit will be in hex adjacent to a Japanese unit in good order. Q6. Advance phase. Units in P5 to Q6 entering close combat. P6 to Q7. Q2 to R2, breaking the stacking limit for dense jungle hexes, which is 2 squads equivalent. M7 to N6. And units in Q5 and Q6 enter close combat. Close combat phase. Starting with hex Q6, let's check the possibility of an ambush. The Japanese will have modifiers of +1 for advancing against jungle hexes, -1 for being stealthy. Australians will have the -1 modifier due to the scenario. There is no ambush. The Japanese will attack with 5 firepower against the Australian squad's 4 firepower, in a ratio of 1:1, with a modifier of -1, 1-on-1. As this close combat will take place using hand-to-hand combat, the Japanese will need at least 8 to affect the Australian squad. The Australian stack with 7 firepower fires on the Japanese squad, with a ratio of 3:2, -1 for the Australian leader, needing at least 9 to affect the Japanese squad. The attack begins with the Japanese. Nine and Australians are not affected. Australian attack 3. The Japanese squad is eliminated, and the Japanese leader and the Australian stack remain in melee. Let's go to close combat in hex Q6, where there is no ambush, because Japanese units penetrated this hex in the movement phase, bonsai charge. The Japanese will attack with 4 firepower against the Australian crews, with a ratio of 1:2, with a modifier of -1, 1-on-1, and +1 for the Japanese leader's modifier, requiring at least 6 to affect the Australian crew. The Australians will attack with 5 firepower against 4 from the Japanese, in a ratio of 1:1, needing at least 7 to affect the Japanese. Japanese dice result 5 and the Australian stack is eliminated. Result of the Australians dice 7, and it is a casualty reduction, which, due to random selection, turns the Japanese squad into a half squad. Rally phase of the Australian stage of the 5th turn. Japanese half squad will attempt to recover the Australian machine gun, abandoned in hex Q5, with a basic roll result of 1 die less than or equal to 5 to recover the weapon. In this case, as the hex is kunai, a +2 modifier will be added to the die result due to the difficulty inherent in recovering a lost weapon in a 200 square meter area of dense grass. 3 + 2 is 5, the medium machine gun is recovered. Australian unit auto-rally attempt at T5, with modifiers, +1 for auto-rally, +4 for the DM marker. 7 + 4 is 11 and morale is not recovered, and the DM marker is removed. Japanese half squad in R2 attempts morale recovery, with modifiers of -1, jungle, +4 from the DM marker. 10 and morale is not recovered. Prep fire phase. Firing from P9 to Q7 of 8 firepower with a +1 modifier, special scenario rule. 9 + 1 10 and it's a miss. Movement phase. Stacking from U2 to X2. S5 heading towards U5. In T5, he suffers an attack with the medium machine gun, recovered by the Japanese half squad, with 4 firepower, +2, hexes with kunai, -1, FF and AM. 9 + 1 is 10, a miss, and the machine gun becomes non-functional. Support weapons, when operated by the enemy faction, have their kill number reduced to 10 and their break number reduced to 8. The half squad heads towards U5. Defensive fire phase. Q7 shooting over Q6, with 8 firepower, +1 for the height advantage and 1 more for the scenario rule. Three + 2 is 5, 2 morale check. The units in Q6 are in melee, so all units in this hex will suffer this attack. The first to be tested is the Japanese leader. 7 + 2 is 9, the Japanese leader is injured and becomes a 7 + 1 leader. This leader then undergoes the test for the severity of the injury, which he does not pass. The injury is serious and causes the death of this leader, who is eliminated from the board. The Australian leader passes. The team does not pass and breaks down. 10 + 1 is 11 and the Australian squad also breaks above the ELR and has its quality reduced to second class. It was an excellent Japanese attack, despite the elimination of the leader, 0. O8 firing on Q6, with 8 firepower, +2, height advantage, scenario rule, -1 by the Japanese leader. Three + 1 is 4, 2 morale check, with the machine gun maintaining the rate of fire. All Australian units pass. New firing with 6 firepower, 6 machine gun firepower, +1. 7 + 1 is 8, ping test check and the machine guns lose their rate of fire. The Australian leader fails the moral test and is pinned. Advancing fire phase. No actions. Rout phase. Australian units under the DM marker in Q6 are eliminated by rout failure. R3 to R1 avoiding overstaking in R2. Advance phase. U5 to V5. X2 to X3. Close combat. No actions. Rally phase of the Japanese phase of the 6th round. The Japanese half squad in Q6 abandons the non-functioning Australian machine gun. The half squad in R2 recovers morale. Auto rally in R1 with +4 modifier, unsuccessful. Australian leader in Q6 tries to recover the machine gun without success. An attempt was made to restore the functioning of the light machine gun in Q7 without success. Prep fire phase. No actions. Movement phase. Q7 over R6, becoming exhausted, CX. First defensive fire from P9, with 8 firepower, +1, height advantage, -1, FFNAM. A miss. Subsequent first fire, with 4 firepower, without modifiers. 6. Normal morale check. 9 and the Japanese unit undergoes stat reduction. N6 to P5. Bonsai charge from R2 aimed at the Australian leader in X3. First impulse R2 to S3, 1.5 mF. Second pulse S3 to U3, 3 mF. Third impulse U3 to V3, 4.5 movement factors. Fourth impulse, a squad and a half squad from V3 to W4 and the leader and a squad from V3 to W3, with a total expenditure of 8 movement factors, finishing the bonsai charge. The Australians do a shot of 16 firepower, -2, FFMO, FFNAM, +1, scenario rule, over W4. 11-1 is 10, normal morale check. Remember that the morale of these Japanese units is raised to 8 because they both participated in the bonsai charge. The Japanese squad passes with +2, suffers the heat of battle and becomes berserk afterwards. Half squad passes. Subsequent first fire, with 8 firepower, -1. 11 and it's a miss. New bonsai charge from 08 on the Australian leader in Q6. First impulse from 08 to P7, 1.5 mF. Second impulse P7 to Q7, 3.5 mF. Third thrust, Q7 to Q6, with a total expenditure of 7.5 mf, not becoming exhausted, since they were accompanied by the Japanese leader. Defensive fire phase. No actions. Advancing fire phase. Japanese stack attack in Q6 on the Australian leader, also in Q6, with 10 firepower, reduced to 5 by the advancing fire phase, tripled to 15 due to it being a triple point-blank fire, with a total of 12 firepower, with the -1 modifier by the leader Japanese. 6 minus 1 is 5, 2 morale check. The Australian leader does not pass and is injured, being transformed into an 8-0 leader. When assessing the severity of the injury, the Australian leader does not pass and is eliminated. Fire group in W3 and W4 fire on stack in X3 with 12 firepower with the +1 modifier per the special scenario rules. 8 + 1 is 9, normal morale check. The Australian leader is injured. The two Australian units break in sequence. The Australian leader passes the injury severity test. Route phase. Squads at X3 to AA5. Advance phase. Japanese units advance 1 hex, and units at W3 and W4 enter close combat with the Australian leader at X3. Close combat phase. Ambush assessment. The Japanese will have modifiers of +1 per attack against jungle hex, -1 for being stealthy, with a modifier of 0. Australians will have the -1 modifier determined by the scenario. The ambush does not occur. The Japanese will attack the Australian leader with 11 attack factors against 1 defense factor, making the elimination of the Australian leader certain. As there is no ambush, the Australian leader will attack the Japanese leader and the half squad, in a ratio of 1 to 3, needing at least 5, in the one-on-one fight column, to affect the Japanese. 3 and the Japanese leader and half squad will be eliminated, as will the Australian leader. Rally phase of the Australian phase of the 6th turn. Attempted auto-rally by one of the Australian squads in AA5 with modifiers of +1 for the auto-rally, -1 for jungle protection, +4 for the DM marker. Unfortunately, the Australian squad did not recover its morale. Prep fire phase. No actions. Movement phase. Australian stack in P9 moves exhaustedly, CX marker, towards hex T8. In Hex Q10, it suffers an attack from the Japanese squad in Q7, with 4 firepower -2, FFNAM, FFMO, +1 depending on the scenario. 10-19 is a miss. Subsequent first fire, with 2 firepower, -1. Another miss. The Australian stacking continues until S9, where it suffers an attack with the medium machine gun from Q6, with 4 firepower, -2, FFMO, FFNAM, +1 according to the scenario rule. (7-1 is 6, normal morale check, and the machine gun maintains the rate of fire. The Japanese leader passes by. The 2 Australian squads break. The medium machine gun uses the rate of fire, with 4 firepower, -1. For -1 is 3, 2 morale check, and the machine gun loses the rate of fire. The Australian leader is injured and is reduced to 6+1. The leader survives the severity of the injury. The first squad breaks again and is reduced to half squad. The second squad passes the test. Squad firing with the light machine gun, with 6 firepower, -2, FFMO, FFNAM, +1 by scenario order, -1 by the Japanese leader's modifier. 8-2 is 6, 1 morale check, and the machine gun loses the rate of fire. The Australian leader suffers another injury and passes the injury severity test. The squad breaks again and is reduced to half squad. Half squad breaks again and is eliminated. New firing with 2 firepower, -2. (6-2 is 4, 1 morale check. The leader suffers a new injury. This time, the leader does not survive and is eliminated. Half squad breaks again and is eliminated. Defensive fire phase. Squads at X3 fire on the half squad at V5 with 8 firepower +2. Eight +2 is 10, a miss. Firing from S6 on V5 with 2 firepower +1 for the scenery, +1 for the palm grove in U6, +1 for the CX marker. 2 + 3 is 5, normal morale check. At this moment, the Australians realized the inevitability of their fate and conceded victory to the Japanese. With this we concluded the battle, in this scenario, with total Japanese victory, thanks to an aggressive tactic, with numerous bonsai charges and careful at the same time, with the hidden approach to the vicinity of the strong Australian defensive positions. The Japanese attack was fierce and some degree of luck resulted in the reduction of Australian positions on the strategic hills. With this we conclude what should be the first in a series of scenarios, where tactical alternatives will be designed and tested. Thanks for listening. Namaste.